Kerry, let's start with you. As we mentioned, the entire Indigenous Advisory Council for CN Rail resigned this week. A confidentiality agreement is preventing us from knowing too much, but CN Rail says it's committed to its journey toward reconciliation. What are your thoughts on this?
I think what happened is there is a lack of acceptance of truth. With reconciliation, there comes truth, and although there's talk about wanting to reconcile, I think it's really difficult for organizations, especially ones as old as the rail line, to recognize their impact and their history, because it's a very difficult history to accept, and for reconciliation, they need to accept the truth.
And Niigaan, your father sat on that council and was also the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that in its final report found the railway was an important aspect of the colonization of the Northwest. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, you just have to look outside, really just the window of my house, to see the evidence of colonialism, the evidence of the Indian Act, the evidence of Sir John A. Macdonald, that it's all embodied within the train line. It's a tricky spot for me to be in because, of course, I've been hearing about some of these concerns for a while, and certain things that my father has tried to address in the organization. The fact is that, I think colonialism's got to colonialize. The fact is that, an organization that's built on the notions of colonialism may not be favorable or interested in wanting to decolonize their organization. And that means taking concrete actions, because I think when this advisory group was founded, CN Rail was very happy. They were very happy that people like Roberta Jameson were coming on board to be able to show up and be on websites and et cetera, et cetera. But when it came to the actual delivery of work, that means you have to do your business differently, because the fact is that train lines go by First Nations, go through First Nations, have deep relationships with Red River Métis. The reality is that CN Rail has one of the biggest legal obligations in this country to create healthy and positive relationships with Indigenous peoples. They owe reparations to Indigenous communities for the things that have been done in the past and continue to be done today. And they owe First Nations and Métis communities to do a better job in the future, especially in the delivery of things like goods or resources or jobs. And if you're not willing to take those actions, then I could certainly see why this committee would not want to continue to have a relationship.
And Kerry, the so-called reconciliation barometer was released on Wednesday. This is a report that tracks public perceptions about progresses towards reconciliation. There was a major increase in awareness of past harms of residential schools in the past year, but it also found that non-Indigenous people are not yet taking the next steps in reconciliation, like getting to know Indigenous communities in their area or taking in Indigenous cultural events. What are your thoughts on where we are?
I've always had the position that reconciliation needs to come from the individual. I believe that true reconciliation happens with people. We can have government-funded programs and initiatives. That's not going to create true reconciliation. What we need are individuals to do the work, to understand the history and do better. I'm not surprised that at the findings, I think what we're seeing now is a lot of people that have talked, who like to wear their orange t-shirts on those special days, and and do all the optics of it. But when it comes right down to the actual work of reaching out, getting to know Indigenous people, it's a little harder. It's a little scarier, and so they pull back, and they're not taking that next step. There seems to be a sort of a barrier, an invisible barrier that still exists, and I think until we as individuals work to bridge that gap, we're not going to see this truth and reconciliation that we would like to see. I am hopeful. I see a lot of young children in the schools and stuff, and they're so much more aware about our history than I ever was. I'm a residential school survivor. I didn't even know about our history. I learned about the history everybody else does. But now to see all these young children, my grandson is grade 2, and he knows about Indian residential schools. I didn't even know about them when I was his age. And I think the future is looking brighter, but right now I think as individuals, we need to take that extra step to reach out, to embrace, and also, just take that leap of faith.
And final question to Niigaan. The TRC final report was released 8 years ago tomorrow. How are you feeling about where we're at?
One of the problems with doing these reports is they take such a big view that you forget that reconciliation was never supposed to look as a sort of goal. It's like reconciliation is about moments, and it's about locations, it's about spaces. And so therefore we need to look smaller, not bigger. It's useful for these kinds of reports, but I think ultimately what these reports do is say, oh, are people attending cultural events? I don't think cultural events cure racism. I think what cures racism is anti-racism work that is being done at the grassroots, in the front lines. I'm more interested in how are people understanding about stolen land than are they attending a powwow. And I think that reconciliation will be embodied in that process. But I still, at the same time, I appreciate that this report is important. The TRC calls are designed to do is to give concrete actions in everyday life, in workplaces, in the private and the public sphere. And so I see a lot of work being done, particularly in certain corners of the country. I see education calls being done, enacted almost daily. So call to action 63. I also see that we have 58, which has been done. For the most part, the Pope came to Canada and apologized. But if the Yellowhead Institute is correct, I mean, the movement is very, very slow. It's like an aircraft carrier can only move a couple inches every little bit once in a while, and it's very difficult to be able to do that. So my hope is that reconciliation, as people get more awareness, which is really what this report's all about, that people will be more amped and be more available to the idea of change, and that we get less residential school deniers, less people who are trying to create racism in workplaces or problems for the rest of us to deal with. That's my hope.
Absolutely. Well, Niigaan, Kerry, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you both so much for sharing your perspectives today.
Yeah, miigwech.